Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the last session of 2 very busy and exciting days. We're very happy to have you here. And my name's Kinga Petrovai, and I'm going to be chairing this panel on coaching and technology. And my goodness, I mean, looking back over these past 2 days, I'm sure you're all coming away with something. Is everyone, who's coming away with an idea that they want to either look into further or implement in their work? Yes? I mean, I think we're just so overwhelmed with ideas and interesting snippets of information that there's so much, a book full of things that I need to look into. So it's been a huge 2 days. But something that really struck me actually was the fact that there was so much about human learning, about working with other people, one-on-one, about the human interaction. There was a lot about that, and I'm really happy because that really follows our talk about coaching, but at the same time bringing in technology. So how does these two things combine? And I have 2 fantastic individuals here who are experts in the field of coaching, and Emma Weber and Nick Baker, and I'm really looking forward to, from very different sides of the coaching spectrum, we're going to look at very different ways of coaching. So I won't really say too much, but I will let them each introduce themselves. So can you please tell me a little bit about yourself and how you see coaching? What does that mean to you? Emma, would you like to start?
Well, it's wonderful to be here this afternoon sharing with everyone, so thanks for finding time to join us today. My name is Em Weber. I am the CEO and founder of Lever Transfer of Learning based in Australia, but I was born in the UK and I actually was taught to coach in the UK. So my first career was in retail in this country. And it would be fair to say that I'm known as a coaching snob down in Australia, hugely passionate about coaching, but also this intersection between coaching and technology. So happy to be sharing today, and the story will unfold, I feel, Kinga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Nick Baker. I work for the Football Association, so football or soccer if you're from further afield. Obviously we look at it from a very traditional, should I say, coaching lens, and I'll explain more later, no doubt, but we look at it from how we support coaches and develop them. In terms of sort of a definition of coaching, we don't have our own definition of coaching at the moment. We're going through that process at the moment. We do a lot of work with Loughborough University, and they use a definition and around coaching is about the practical application of professional and intrapersonal knowledge in order to help athletes improve their confidence, their competence, their connection, and the character within a specific context. And I like that, and I'll explain maybe a model in a moment that aligns to that we use it within football.
And one of the things that Nick and I realized when we first spoke is that we have completely different definitions of coaching. And of course, I'm sure you will all have your own definition. For me, coaching is about helping someone identify where they are now, where are they trying to get to, and bridge the gap between the two. And very much as Bo was speaking about this morning, I don't know who was there and enjoyed the session with Bo, it really inspired me. There was a phrase this morning, he said, if you tell someone something, you have taken it away from them. So for me, I'm very much a purist coach in that it's not about giving people the answers, it's not about telling them how to do it, it's helping them have a conversation with themselves to work that out. So Nick and I have very different views of coaching, but hopefully that will create a rich conversation and will then fit into your organizations in different ways.
Absolutely. So different ways of using technology as well, which we were going to get to a little bit later in both. So we're talking about coaching, and you're talking about coaching coaches. So there's 2 different definitions there we'll have to keep in mind. But first, let's start with, why do you think coaching is so powerful? What is it about that human, or maybe not so human, connection when you're doing it with technology, but what is it about coaching strategies that are so powerful?
So for me, if we think about self-determination theory, and we really have people working on the kind of autonomy, relatedness, competency, that if we have a coaching model and we get someone to own their own goals, we can create real accountability for change. And everywhere I'm looking in organisations at the moment, we need the behavioural change, we need the business impact and outcomes. If we refer back to the first two speakers yesterday, both of them were talking about taking action. And for me, coaching is about helping the individual hold themselves accountable to moving forward with that action. So whether we're talking about sustainability, whether we're talking about change within our organisations, whether we're talking about the application of learning, the power of having someone hold themselves accountable to themselves using a coaching model, for me, it's the best.
Absolutely, holding yourself accountable and about changing behavior, which is I think what all organizations would want to achieve, but that's a very important aspect to not forget. Your end goal is to be able to change behavior.
And as you change the behavior, you create an impact within the business.
Exactly.
So the business impact is preceded by that change in behavior.
Right, wonderful.
Yeah, for me, for another level, both within sport, and I'm a qualified coach, both within business and sport, and I've just seen coaching just have such a transformational effect on people's lives, both within sport and also business. But you know, you can all think of, I'm sure, when you've been in a PE lesson, a physical education lesson, or in sports, where you've seen a good coach versus, and you've probably seen some bad coaching behaviours, and it can have such transformational effect on an individual and a young person for the rest of their life. But also, it has an effect on the community, even in terms of developing the community and around that coach. So yeah, it just has such a power to play on society, I believe, without getting a little bit too grand.
Just to touch on that a little bit about the community, and I think that's something that a lot of organizations are talking about, learning culture, culture in general, but learning culture. How does that have an impact on the community, the coaching aspect?
Well, it just, it sort of radiates around. I think somebody said this morning, the impact of that one person, the people they're having the impact on, and bring people in around that, that, for me, it just radiates out across many people. And within business, you know, and I'll maybe touch on it later, is you know, that coaching culture, the impact by asking the right questions and get people to work it out for themselves, saves so much time and effort and builds on that education.
Right, it's the domino effect in creating that culture. So we're talking about coaching, and you both spoke about change in behavior and behavior change. So let's dig into that a little bit more, and how can coaching really change behavior?
Thank you. I think it's through getting people to actually make a decision first. So very much when we're looking at coaching, we're leveraging off people having made a decision for what they're going to put into place. In a lot of cases, that's as part of a learning engagement. So I'm sure many of you are looking at blended programs and having coaching as part of that. I actually think if we leverage off someone making that decision, getting them to document the decision, and then supporting them with a follow-up process to that, that actually generates the behavioural change, because you're actually then sitting, reflecting. As you reflect, you then think about what else do I need to do to move it further forward. So it's really in the power of the questions that creates the behavioural change.
So it's really about having people, helping them to think deeper in order to make the decision to think deeper about it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right.
And there's the thinking deeper, but there's even something as basic as helping people actually slow down and think.
Right.
We're all so busy, we're all so kind of distracted in so many ways. Just if you can even give someone the gift of actually just thinking things through, that can be a really powerful way to start to create behaviour change.
And there's so little time for that often.
So little time. And I just want to follow up on a point, Nick, around the community piece. I think one of the challenges that sometimes comes up for me with coaching is that in many cases it is one-on-one. We're seeing a lot more kind of group coaching now, but very much a sort of a one-on-one model in some ways. And we sometimes see that whole thing of, well, actually, if it's one-on-one, how is it about the community? How is it about kind of networking across people? And very much when I'm working with an individual, I find that if you help that individual have that strong connection with themselves, they've then got much more to go out to other people with. So it's almost like your connection with yourself starts first, and then you have the ability to network and go out and take it to others. So I think there's kind of a link with community, but starting with that strength for ourselves and knowing how to have agency, as Bo was saying this morning.
There is so much of a slowing down, a need for it to be able to slow down, think things through, question it, and then there's so much more to give, which is really important.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really interesting you mentioned decision making. We use, in order to develop our coaches, we use a model that's come out of Leeds Beckett University, a decision making model. We see supporting coaches, what coaching is also a decision making process. So we use what they term a coach decision making model, where if you imagine a triangle, and in the middle of the triangle is self, and around the outside you've got the players you're working with, the professional expertise and knowledge of the game, and how to coach. So understanding yourself in order to be a better coach. What are your motivations, your philosophy, your coaching philosophy, or your sports philosophy, as it were? Are you a reflective practitioner? How do you learn, etc. Understanding really under yourself, and then that's the starter. And then depending on the context you work in, who are the players or who are the people you're working with? In my context, working, if you're a coach working with under-8 boys versus a group of under-16 girls, very different needs and wants from the individuals. Understanding the sport and your technical expertise around that, and then finally the art of coaching, how to coach, how to deliver a session, all within the context you're working. Even if you're coaching adult males within a grassroots club versus the Premier League, very different context, and those 4 aspects of the triangle in the middle bit all interrelate. So it's about understanding why, how, what, and who you're coaching. And I've been speaking to people over the last couple of days, and I thought it'd be interesting to share, if you're in the corporate world working with managers, line managers, of looking at that model of, do they understand themselves and their motivations for why they're there, what their interest within the role, the people they're managing, their technical professional expertise, and then the art, their leadership and management style, perhaps in terms of how they lead those teams. I thought it might be just an interesting one to share.
Right, it's really understanding the purpose and understanding the different aspects of it in order to make it a success. So we're talking about coaching, and often we think about that as a very one-on-one, as you said, activity. But this is something that organizations are trying to scale throughout infiltrate in the culture, but also scale as a tool. How do you scale coaching? How is that possible?
Well, I think, just to give you some context, if you'd have asked me 10, 15 years ago, sport is very linear in terms of a pathway and very qualification heavy, and people have got to get to the next qualification to learn anything new. What we're trying to change, and we're still on that journey of we're phrasing it, moving from a pathway to a landscape. So looking at the domain of grassroots coaching or senior game coaching, how can we support people within that? So beforehand, you had to do one course after the next and collect your badges in our world. But how do we create that landscape of learning? So, the average life of a coach in grassroots. So I'll take it back a step. So my workforce is 140,000 coaches who work in the regulated football game, and there's many thousands more in community or education settings. 135,000 of those, 36,000 of those work in grassroots, so parents, volunteers, and the like. So how do we support them in their world, rather than them having to wait 2 years to get on the next course that might take them, £300 to qualify and 6 months to do? How can we support people there and there? And some move from same time, same place delivery to same time, any place delivery, anytime, any place, and provide a number of different modes and methods of support for them when and where they need it. So, and it's also about understanding the tasks and concerns of the learners. So rather than just putting out a course that's 6 months long because they fill it with content just in case, how do we get to know and use research and evidence and insight about the individuals so we can provide a lot more smaller bite-sized chunks of learning that I'll mention in a moment.
Okay, we'll get into the technology bit in a bit, but I like that. Rather than making it linear, it's a landscape.
Yeah.
And that's by really infiltrating all the different stakeholders in the field, which is really, really important. Emma, would you like to say about scaling? How can we scale coaching?
So I've already kind of confessed to being a coaching snob, and certainly when I first started in the space of coaching, so committed to coaching, so excited, so passionate about it, I really wanted to make sure that it's not just available to the top levels within organisations, which therefore brings the question of, well, how are we going to scale it? And at the time, sort of 15, 20 years ago, the solution for me was to very much work on shorter conversations. So what's the shortest conversation you can have with someone to make an impact? And what's the fewest number of conversations you can have with someone to make an impact?
So that it's not a 1 hour session with an executive and they have the time and not the time, but they have the resources to be able to do that. So you were trying to scale it by making it shorter and more accessible.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we started with a 45-minute conversation. Then we went to 30 minutes. Then we experimented with 20 minutes. And actually, as a one-on-one, kind of landed on the 30 minutes over the phone being the most scalable way. And if you can leverage the blended learning solution of a learning intervention and coaching, link the two through action planning. So getting the individual to commit to what they're going to put in place from a training program, you then have leveraged the best of your learning with the insights with very short, sharp, focused coaching, and can really kind of create behavioural change in that way. So back before we were starting to embrace technology, that was kind of our solution of saying shortest, quickest, lowest,
most efficient way.
Most efficient. I'm hugely driven by efficiency.
Right.
And what's the most efficient way we can scale coaching? And that was the solution at the time.
Did you find a strategy that what made the 30 minutes effective? Is there something that maybe you can share in that?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yes.
So we have a really
There's a lot, but
we have a methodology. It's called the Turning Learning into Action methodology. And in some ways, I did a lot of analysis around different types of coaching model. A lot of us will be, I'm sure, in the room familiar with the GROW coaching model. And, to me, even if you look at like a 15-stage coaching model, most of them will boil down to a version of GROW. But you can have GROW done well, and you can have GROW done badly. And so for me, it's less about the coaching model, but how well is it executed? And I think there's 3 levels within that. Firstly, there's the ability to be listening rather than do listening. Secondly, I think it's the ability to ask powerful questions. So what really is a powerful question? And thirdly, for me, it's, does anyone remember that toy, the Slinky? You know, the one that kind of rolls down the stage. So the Slinky, the great thing about the Slinky is it's a balance between structure and flexibility. And so a lot of the time with coaching, because we are giving it over to the participant or to the learner, it's the power of questions, it's their agenda. We think it needs to be really unstructured. But actually, if you can get micro and macro structure available within that conversation, you can be super efficient because you're kind of creating a vessel for people to go deep. And so for me, that secret sauce of the Slinky metaphor and that balance between structure and flexibility is what really nails the methodology to create behaviour change in a very short period of time.
that's fantastic. That is definitely one of those snippets that I want to look into more and investigate. But I liked what you said, be listening, don't do listening. Can you just give a little bit of an explanation of what that means?
I'm a bit of I seem to go around upsetting people, not intentionally, but there's the whole kind of active listening thing that we're taught to listen. But actually, even through being taught to listen, you're so busy about thinking how you are listening. Whereas actually, if you can just sit and be with that other person and truly listen with an empty mind, you are then actually really listening rather than trying to busy yourself through being an active listener.
That's great. That's really important. Really focus, which is, of course, the intent. But you're right.
Yeah.
When you're trying to be listening, then you're thinking about yourself and your process. And just this morning, the talk was really about getting to know someone, getting to know their reasons, which is an important part of coaching, obviously. Yeah. Fantastic. So, of course, it's not easy to scale up coaching, and there's many, many different ways of doing it. But what do you think are some of the key barriers in order to scale up coaching? What are some of the key barriers that we should be thinking about before we endeavor on this?
Well, I'm sure people in the audience here would say one of the key barriers, time, money, and skills. I would think are the barriers to scaling coaching. And often, we have a manager level within our organisation And some people are naturally good coaches, some people aren't, so you can kind of have your real range of skill at a manager level within an organisation. And the thing with coaching is it sounds so simple, but to do it really, really well, it's actually kind of quite a complex skill. So I think that's one of the barriers to scale. The other thing for me about barriers to scale, and we're going to be talking about technology, is that in some ways as leaders within coaching, which I'm assuming many of us in the room are, I think we have to get over ourselves. So I think personally I have been one of the biggest barriers to developing our coaching tech, because I certainly to begin with set out to try and prove that coaching with technology couldn't be done, because it just seems such a ridiculous concept when it is such a human-based approach. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to kind of check our egos at the door and be open to what technology can do and challenge our own thinking around that. So I think that will be kind of a barrier going forward.
That's interesting. Yes. I mean, it's interesting that you came into it thinking, surely this can't be done, which is often when people endeavor into making learning technologies, they're like, everything can be done with technology. So I think in both situations, you kind of have to stay a little bit humble, not to think that it can't be done, but also not to think that it can be a solution to everything. So we'll get to the technology very soon, but what are some of the barriers that you see in?
Yeah, for us, as I said, we're trying to change the culture of coaching. So for us, it's the history and the tradition within coaching that we're trying to change, the very didactic old-fashioned view of coaching. We're trying to implement that, understanding the individual and making that decision-making process is quite significant change, as a few people in the audience will know. Some of it is behavior change and changing beliefs, which are entrenched over a period of time. We've got lots of experts within coaching. Within football, it's great. Everybody knows football, but because you've watched it on the TV, it doesn't necessarily make you a good coach or understand the process that goes through it. So that's some of our changes. And then furthermore, I think in addition to what you said, Emma, for us, it's inclusivity and accessibility. So, trying to change the dial of to make coaching and the opportunities for players and coaches to be much more inclusive and accessible. And so seeing people just like me and improving that access is something we're desperately trying to address.
Fantastic. And so let's get to the technology bit. So how is technology able to help scale coaching in both of your fields in very different ways?
Yeah, we're trying to look at it quite differently. So we use technology, so as I said, 140,000 people, 135,000 volunteers. We're competing against people's jobs, people's lives, the families, and other pursuits. So we have to make things engaging. We have to make it easy for people and accessible. So yes, of course, we've got an LMS, but it's clunky. It's a bit old-fashioned. So we're trying to use other opportunities. So we have Twitter at the moment. We've got a YouTube channel, and we've got a few other bits and pieces, but basically the attempt over the next couple of years and what we're in the process of if you imagine the marketing funnel, the pipeline is basically widen the funnel. So we're just going to kick off a big piece of work with a traditional marketing agency actually, and create, a bit of a cliche, but a TikTok channel, an Instagram and a Facebook page, so that at the top of the funnel, we're using tools that people got in their pockets, almost, to use parlance, in the flow of work. So people can access content in performance support opportunities and resources where they're at, whether they're at home scrolling, watching TV, and that sparks some interest and drives people into what they're looking at, into our ecosystem, if you like, or I'm on the way to training or on the way to a session, I don't know what to do, I can quickly go in my phone and not have to log into another LMS or something behind a paywall, and try and create content that people are used to using, vertical images and videos, and that's maybe slightly fun and different than the traditional coaching content that you might see out there. So trying to deliberately do things differently and be a bit innovative with that. We are also, just like many people I'm sure, trying to move towards some form of, I use the word loosely, LXP functionality. So once we've got people engaged and we've hit the reach and engaged, acquired people in at the top of the funnel, we're moving people down and engage them within our ecosystem of call it LXP for now, so within the system to provide bite-sized, smaller pieces of learning to support that domain, if you like, so they don't have to go on a course to get the next bit of learning. So just widen that funnel, both at the top and in the bottom, so we get more advocates and people coming in and around our ecosystem.
Fantastic. And can you just tell us a little bit about what that looks like? So there's a coach going to the field, and they have access to all these different channels in their pocket, the Twitter, the YouTube. What does this experience look like from an individual perspective?
Yeah, very much so. It's
how do they find what they need in that situation?
What we're trying to get hold of is as I said, people at home trying to. I think Jane Hart in a previous conference put up a slide where, in our world, learning has traditionally been quite formal, quite intentional. I know I'm going off course. I've paid for a course, or I know I'm going to go online and search for this thing. But what I'm trying to tap into is the unintentional, the serendipitous stuff, if you like, of scrolling through Twitter or just searching in TikTok and coming across something that will spark interest, as well as putting it where people are at. So something, as I said, people are on Twitter or Instagram every day. So can we create content on those channels, appealing to specific audiences, with content that appeals to those people? So, indexing for coaches, Instagram over-indexes for female coaches. Likewise, YouTube over-indexes for male coaches. So can we use that content, use that insight to create content for specific audiences at specific times that will capture them and keep them in coaching?
So you have very widely available content on YouTube, on Twitter, but then you index it so that they can search. They're like,
Yes.
I'm having trouble with, how can I improve my team's such
Absolutely.
and such? So then they use the tags, which are already available, to really narrow their scope.
Exactly, and also within TikTok and Instagram, create reels or ongoing content that people can rely on week out, whether it's a series of nutrition content or a series of whatever content that they know it's going to come every week, whether it's, we've got a podcast channel as well that we create for different modes and medians of learning. So exactly that.
That's fantastic that you use the tools that are already being used,
Yep.
because often the technology is what people trip over, either because it's just not something they're used to, or whatever that might be. It's not in their habit to use it.
Yeah, we've got a social community platform which is fantastic, really, really powerful, but it's behind a login, so people got to log into it, people got to find it. So why not just use Facebook and create the communities, create the engagement where people are at? We can maybe drive people to our own community for when they're on a course or for some deeper conversations, but absolutely using the tools where people are at, that people are used to. There's a reason why they're so popular, because they're intuitive. It's, I've heard buzzword, consumer grade. It's there and it's accessible, so why not use them?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And Emma, now let's hear about a very different way of using technology in coaching.
I mean, I love hearing Nick talk about the way he tackles coaching, and I think there's certainly some similarities, and the numbers you're talking about, I think, are fascinating, the way that you have access to those. I think the key difference, though, is you're leveraging the content, or very much getting that content to people at the right time.
Yep.
Whereas in our model of the world and the type of coaching work that we do, is that it's no longer about the content. It's actually about how do we change the behaviours and get people to apply something they already know or that they've learned from another place. And through kind of giving it to their own sort of space, you create that accountability and ownership for change, which of course is the same whether you're talking coaching with tech or coaching with human. So I think we kind of need to make that distinction and that different definition of coaching. The interesting thing for me, and I don't know who was in the session with David Kelly and Danny Johnson yesterday when we were talking about different types of tech, Danny put up a grid around digital coaching. And of course, what we saw on that grid is there is a whole host of things which are called digital coaching. And so much the same as coaching can mean one thing to another, can mean different things to different people, exactly the same with digital coaching. So on one hand, you can have human coaching, which is tech enabled, is called digital coaching. And that tech enablement might be through a matching process of matching your coachee and your coach. Or it may be even your digital coaching could be around a scheduling platform that helps the coachee and the coach schedule. Now, all of those things will help scalability. But for me, the real game changer is when you actually have a piece of tech that coaches. And so essentially what we're talking about is a chatbot coach. And you imagine you're having a conversation that feels like a real human conversation, but you're actually just talking to a piece of tech. Now, there's some things around it where you need to be absolutely transparent. This isn't about trying to trick people that they're actually, pretending they're talking to a human, but actually you're scaling up by having a piece of tech behind it. So I think there's a piece around being absolutely transparent.
Right.
One of the other keys, I think, and we make it really clear in our approach, is that you have a way out of that conversation with the chatbot. So we have a rescue command. Anytime you want to speak to a human, you just say rescue and you will go through into a human loop. Now, what we find is around 2% of people will hit rescue.
Okay.
It's the psychological safety of knowing that you can say rescue if you want to and get away from the chatbot if needed. That's there for. It's not so that everyone then has a human coaching conversation. But I just really, when you're thinking about digital coaching, challenge your own assumptions as to what do I mean by digital coaching? Is it tech enabled? Is it actually a piece of tech that is physically coaching?
Can I just pick up a comment you made? Yeah, it is absolutely about the content, but it's also about, I think, as the governing body for football in the country, our USP, I think, is. I was in this session yesterday with the guys from McKinsey, and they were talking. I don't know if anyone was in there, with talking about apprentices and apprenticeships in the traditional sense, if you like, and always needing to ask the question why, and for you as the looking after your apprentices is explaining and verbalizing what you're doing so they learn. What we try to do with our content is to explain that why. There are however much content, football, soccer content is out there. We try to explain the why, and in trying to help people understand why they do that. It's great for Jurgen Klopp delivering a session, but that's not applicable for an under-8 girls team. So why is that the case? And when we deliver our sessions, whether that's YouTube or wherever, we try to help coaches understand the why, so then they could be better coaches. They understand what they're doing rather than just delivering a session because they've seen it on the TV, if you like.
Yeah.
That's important.
And it's a real overlap of kind of principles there, because of course, de Bot's theory of higher meaning, the more times you ask why, the more you will get to that person's reason for being and reason for being alive. So, certainly why is a powerful question, as long as we really couch it in not having that tone of why have you done something wrong. We were all taught as children, when someone asks us why, we quite often go on the defensive, because typically we're asked why we've done something, it's because we've done it wrong.
Right, it's really understanding the meaning behind something, the purpose behind it, which is something that I come back to so often in learning design and learning development, is that let's understand the purpose of why we are doing what we're doing. And that's really important for coaches to understand too.
And another parallel here, if I can, between the approaches, you were talking about having the content where people are already having their content. Yeah. And so very much when you have a chatbot coach, what you want to be doing is helping that individual have the conversation with their coach, how they would usually be having and where they'd usually be having a conversation within their organisation. So very much things like, if your organisation is used to having conversations on Microsoft Teams, that's where you'd be wanting to have your chatbot coach. If people are typically using SMS to contact each other, that's the way that you'd be wanting to have your chatbot coach. So it's about taking the conversation to where people are having that conversation, as opposed to hiding the conversation perhaps in the LMS or where someone has to go and find it. We have people scheduling the time to talk to their chatbot. So much the same way as you would schedule a time to speak with your human coach, you actually have an appointment in your diary to chat with the chatbot. So it's kind of crazy, because the chatbot can talk to you 24/7. It's available anytime. It's sat there waiting. But because you've actually scaffolded it through putting an invite in your diary that you have complete ownership and agency over, you are therefore creating time and putting time aside for that conversation.
And you're also reducing the barriers to having to click on something extra, go into a new program. You're really putting it, as both of you were saying, really putting putting it where people are at, because we get so overwhelmed, and I think a lot of people have experienced how overwhelming it is to have all these different systems and links, and so it's very important to have it easily accessible. But can you tell us a little bit about what it looks like? I mean, coaching is such a personal activity. What does a chatbot conversation look like? How is that similar or different from having it with a human?
So Kinga, I don't want to go off track here, but let's just imagine I'm a chatbot.
Okay.
Yeah? And imagine you in the audience are people that are having a conversation with me as a chatbot. Yeah? And you've got a time in your diaries, it's 4:25 on a Thursday afternoon or whatever day of the week we are. And so I might say to you as the chatbot by SMS or Microsoft Teams, "Hi, it's Em here. Time for our coaching session. Looking forward to speaking with you today. If this time no longer works for you, just message change and we'll reschedule. Otherwise, say good to go and we'll have our conversation." So think in your minds, what would I reply? We're all sat here, we've got nothing else doing, good to go. Great, so we're ready to have our conversation today. Think about a skill that you are looking to improve. So everyone in your mind now, think of a skill. What would you text Coach Em as your skill you're looking to improve? Just get that skill in your mind. As a chatbot, I may then say, so I've received your skill. Great, we're going to be working on X skill today. So thinking about X skill for a moment, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you now with that particular skill? Just take a moment and have a think. So in your mind, think about what number you're at with that skill. Text it or SMS it to me by Teams. Fabulous. You're at number A. Now, if you were to really focus over the next 2 weeks, where could you shift that number to on a scale of 1 to 10? Take a moment to think. In your mind, text it to me. It's number B. Fantastic. So if you're going to shift from a number A to a number B that you're holding in your mind, what does it look like at number B compared to what's happening at number A? What's the difference between those two numbers? Take a moment to tell me that now. Text, 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 text. Great. So if we've got the difference there, what's the top thing you need to do to move to number B? So, Kinga, I went on a rant. But
no,
do you
that's
see
great.
how
I like that.
I'm the chatbot, you're having the conversation with yourself. I'm not telling you the answers, because if I tell you the answers, it takes away your agency. But it really helps you slow down and think. And question for the audience, how long do you think people would spend chatting with a piece of tech, having that kind of conversation? What's the gut feel? 20 minutes? 10 minutes?
Less than if you're talking to a human person.
And so what time would you put on that?
I think it would be as short or as long as you needed it to be. So yeah, it could just be a quick 5-10 minutes if that's all you needed.
So when we were first playing around with this tool, obviously I'm a vendor, and I was having a conversation with one of my clients. We'd finished the formal part of the conversation, we were having coffee. So you kind of have the meeting and then you have the coffee, the post-meeting. And I said to the client, I said, have a look at this thing we've been playing around with. And I showed her this thing, and which we now know as Coach Em. And she said, Emma, I want it. And I said to her, really? Do you really think people are going to talk to this thing? And she's like, yes, I want it now. I'm like, okay. So, you go away and you get busy and you create it and make it happen. Now, all of us on the team thought it would be less than 10 minutes. We thought you're going to have maximum 5 to 10 minutes of people's bandwidth that they'd speak with Coach Em. The average coming out of that first pilot was 25 to 30 minutes, a conversation with the tool. Okay. You could have knocked me over. I just did not foresee that happening. But the interesting thing is you're having this conversation with yourself, And how often do we truly get listened to? Like, this tool is listening to you. It's playing it back to you. And you kind of get a bit hooked in, even if you think to begin with, oh, I'm just going to tick and flick and short answers. It just astounded me.
That's amazing, because you're really guiding a conversation. And I think that's what maybe some people are not thinking about in terms of coaching, is that it's enabled by technology because it's not telling you anything back, but it's helping you guide your thinking, helping you guide whereas often in our thoughts, we just want to say, oh, what's the answer? What should I do next? Rather than really taking the steps to guide us through. That's really interesting. So in this world of technology, of course, it's hard to ignore the ChatGPT effect. So what do you see? How does that ChatGPT here, well, we hear so much of it. How does it play into or impact what you're doing in terms of coaching, and especially technology and coaching?
Yeah, for us, it's an unknown quantity at the moment. Coaching is such a practical experience, so it's unknown. However, I was speaking to Learning Pool downstairs earlier on, who are our current vendor for LMS, and they're looking at it in terms of they provide a lot of our support for some of our behaviour style courses, and they were thinking about they're looking at using AI and ChatGPT in a sort of the behavioural type questions. So support for us in our safeguarding world. If you imagine an avatar of a young child who has been maybe abused or something, and having that conversation about that case study, using it to bring to life a case study is how they're going to look at and develop some learning for us potentially. So it was going to be really new for us, but yeah, that's far as we've got so far.
Well, I certainly think it's really new for everyone, and we've heard a lot of talk about it at the conference here. I think sometimes when you're looking at something like ChatGPT, it really helps to kind of break it down into parts. And of course, you've got the knowledge-based model, but also then you have the LLM, the large language model, that is kind of powering that knowledge base. And again, Danny mentioned in her data and research that only 35% of vendors were actually looking at LLMs, and she sort of highlighted that as an opportunity. And I certainly think that's an opportunity, because if we separate the kind of the ChatGPT hype as to how are we going to practically use this, what we can then start to do is leverage an LLM against your own internal kind of knowledge base within an organization. Or if you're working on coaching that actually doesn't have a content base, you can then sort of leverage that to have a large language model having the capability to sound even more human and reflect even further. I mean, there is going to be kind of real challenging things around how do we kind of control the LLM not to kind of go off on its own path. We're certainly experimenting with how we can stop the LLM answering the question when someone answers it, because of course we're not about kind of sharing knowledge and content. So there will be challenges, but it's going to have a huge impact, and I just think it will only kind of improve the quality and the conversation. So as long as we can kind of get the safeguards, guardrails in place, then it's going to have a big impact.
And also, I think probably a reminder to people. You said, of course, that you have to be transparent and very honest, that you're not talking to a person.
Yeah.
But it very quickly is forgotten. Do you see, especially when there's that natural language, do you think that poses a danger or some kind of guardrails, as you said?
Yeah, I think actually people can get quite excited about the whole idea that they help they have their chatbot actually form a persona. And so again, back in the beginning of our work, I really couldn't believe that people were wishing Coach M Happy Christmas.
Okay.
But
right.
they were, but they knew they were wishing the chatbot Happy Christmas.
Right.
And what actually the studies show is that the way that you treat other people and how you kind of converse with them, you would do the same with the chatbot. So it's kind of a reflection of how, if you're the type of person that thanks the bus driver, you're the type of person that thanks your chatbot coach.
Right.
So it's kind of our social norms are being put onto the chatbot. But I think people are happy with that, because as long as they know it's a social norm going onto a chatbot, it's not something that's duplicitous or kind of pretending it's something it's not. And then you're just having a bit of a game with it, and it's a bit of fun.
Yeah, interesting. Very, very interesting. So technology is definitely not black and white, and it's not either or to have technology or not to have technology. The sweet spot, I think, is really to find that augmented space where technology is enabling us to do our work better. How do you see augmentation in your field of coaching?
Well, for us, I think for us, it's starting with what the learner needs, what the tasks and concerns, what the individuals need, and then build the technology to help solve that problem. Like I say, it's not a binary one or the other, and it certainly don't start with technology. For me, it's really understanding the crux of the problem, what we're trying to solve, and then using technology where you can, whether that's, in our case, what we're doing, social media, to try and solve the problem the best, most efficient way you can.
So you said to understand the problem, which is so important in everything, really, to first understand the problem. So in terms of sports coaching, how do you help your coaches to understand the problem better, or what does that look like?
It's around, I guess it's that original model is the problem in front of you is the people you've got to understand the individuals. Coaching's seen as quite a, coach a group of people, treat them all the same, but it's similar to in business. You've got to understand the individuals first and foremost within that team and try and cater for those differences within your coaching, and that's the nuances and the subtleties of coaching that people really may not understand within sports coaching. They see the coach on the sideline shout and bark or whatever, but a good coach really understands how to get the best out of the individual. And again, cliche, it might be the arm round a person or like that. So that's it's the understanding the individual.
And I think that's such an important thing, because some people have it innately and some people really need to be taught. Have you found something to be useful in terms of helping the coaches to understand the problem before they can bring in the technology, before they can?
Not quite. Can you say the question again? Sorry.
So how do you help, do you give any strategies to the coaches on how they can try to understand the problem well?
There's not many. It's literally just getting to know the players, getting to know the individuals they're with.
So focus on that human aspect.
Absolutely, it's all about coaching for us is a human endeavor, and we're all trying to apply technology to make it more efficient. But ultimately, it's that relationship with that one-to-one or one to a unit or one-to-many relationship that is when I said at the very beginning the definition of interpersonal skills. It is about all the soft side. Yes, you might know football, but that doesn't make you a good coach. Yeah. Which is where people fall down often. It's that's why it's difficult for senior ex-players to suddenly transition into coaching, because they don't have the intrapersonal and interpersonal skills, and that's the real golden area for us.
That is, I think, in the corporations too, and any team that you're at, it's understanding who is on your team, and I think especially now when there's so many remote teams, it's so important to understand who the person is, what do they do in their free time, what motivates them, and then bringing the technology in afterwards is really important. So what does augmentation look like in your world?
So for me, the tech can help that individual build the relationship with themselves, and you can certainly just use a piece of tech to coach people. But also you can augment a human coach with a piece of tech. You can actually have a kind of almost a three-way loop between the piece of tech knowing what the individual has said to the human coach knowing what the piece of tech, what the participant has said to the piece of tech. And so what you could maybe have a 9-month coaching assignment with 3 30-minute human coaching sessions and 5 tech coaching sessions. And so, for just over the investment of one exec coaching session, you've got 9 months worth of coaching for a mid-level manager further down your organization. So for me, it's getting the best of both worlds and enabling the human and the tech, to work together. And certainly we have some people that I work with that started on just having the piece of tech available to their teams, and now at certain levels within an organisation would say, okay, well, we're now going to have some human coaching, some tech coaching. So across different levels of an organisation, you can augment in different ways.
When you do that, does the human coach see the conversation with the tech coach?
Yes.
Interesting, okay. So they see what has been happening before and then...
And what it means is that then when you're as a human coach, you can actually go deeper quicker because the surface level conversation has been had with a piece of tech.
That's actually a really, really important point, isn't it? That you've already kind of done the work, the preparation work with the tech, but then they can just jump in a lot faster.
Yeah.
And that's really fantastic. Okay, well, before we move on, let's open it up to question. If anybody has questions in terms of coaching and technology, we have someone with a mic. Yes, please.
Thank you.
Oh.
Almost there. Okay, perfect.
Thank you. So my question is whether you see technology and chatbot coaching appropriate for any kind of coaching. So my dilemma is when I think I can see how this can work with specific technical skills and practice. I think when we get into career coaching, transition coaching, where there is a lot of emotional and human resonance, which I think it's needed. So I'm curious of your perspective there.
Shall I jump into that one first, Nick? I sort of said earlier, I think one of the biggest barriers to the kind of growth of this tech is ourselves. We have a fabulous client across in New Zealand, and I think for around 4 years, they were saying to me, Emma, we want to use this piece of tech for broader coaching. And they wanted to use it for professional development coaching, which I think here in the UK, we almost call it more performance support coaching. So people would set their annual or their quarterly goals and be coached by a piece of tech. So it's not a goal that relates to a training program, it's anything. And I kept going, no, that's not what we do, it won't work. No, that's not what we do, it won't work. Literally, they were bugging me for about 3 or 4 years. And eventually we said, okay, let's just give it a go. And it did work, and it does work. And it kind of really surprised me. And so I think, again, it's about our preconceptions. We think it's about that kind of emotional connection. But if you are creating that emotional connection for the individual with themselves, and you're taking them on that journey to reflect for themselves, it can still be very powerful with a piece of tech. Now, with that particular client, we have one group that just has the tech, one group that has augmented, so they have human and tech. The 9 months is finishing up later on this month, so we'll have a full data set in then to compare the two groups. Anecdotally, they've been running sort of focus groups to kind of get the feedback, and both groups are enthusiastic. And interestingly, the group that has the human coaching as well, and I'll put my hand up, I am the human coach that's working with the group that gets human, because I wanted to try it out. They are no more enthusiastic about the process than the group that has just had the piece of tech. Now, it's anecdotal at this stage. We want to get the full data. But again, that just really amazed me. So I hear what you're saying. I would agree with you. I kind of do agree with you. But the evidence is showing me otherwise. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great talk, by the way. I'm a massive ChatGPT fan. I use it regularly. And for me, I can see it kind of literally blowing out, even to the point of we just don't need coaches. I honestly think it can go that far. I mean, I'm one of those people that says please and thank you to the chat, just because in case it gets aware and starts to kill everybody, I want to be on the good side of it. But kind of, I'm going to be cheeky in 2 questions. You slightly mentioned psychological safety. For me, one of the key areas is psychological safety, well-being, self-awareness. There kind of has to be a good platform that support. You can't really, at least for me, I feel you can't go into coaching or start a coaching conversation without that really good foundation. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And more on a football take, I've noticed that over time it's now not no longer football managers, it's football coaches. And you see, especially in the press and the media, they talk about, oh, that manager is a man manager, or they're getting the most out of that team. And for me, is that a breakdown in coaching, or is that just an individual? I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
Well, you go first, if you like.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so I think in terms of kind of setting that foundation, there is a piece around setting expectations. A lot of that would be around kind of the confidentiality or what's happening to the conversation. So there's a whole, a privacy, a data. Ethics, we haven't kind of touched on that, so that is important. In our human work, we would have coaches that would sort of say, oh, you know what, I need a 90-minute session up front to really, get to know the person, to really ground with them, to, build rapport, and then we'll kind of get into the coaching. And I got people from like a 90 minutes expectation down to saying, you can do that in 4 minutes flat. And then you can actually then take those principles into your chatbot and your piece of tech. So I think the psychological safety piece, I should have mentioned that sooner. The whole fact that, ChatGPT or a tech, it can't judge you because it doesn't have the ability to judge, is fascinating. And I think there is a big, advantage to that going forward. I remember it was one of our second projects. It was a big homewares client down in Melbourne, and a young guy said to me, I shared more with Coach M than I would have done a human coach. And my first thought was, that is ridiculous. And then, my second thought was, check your ego at the door. What was going on for that guy? And he was just the most beautiful retail store manager of this hardware store, and he was just shy. But he opened up to this chatbot coach, and good on him.
It's in a way, it's taking it to the next level when you have a much deeper conversation sometime with the person is not in your city, you don't know them, they don't know anyone in your circles. You can have a lot deeper conversation. So this is one step further that can open people up. So I'll let you respond to the coaching question.
I think I'm answering your question, so shout if I don't. I think that there's two aspects to it. I think that the better managers these days understand the individuals in the team and respond to what they need, just as much as you do in the grassroots coaching. But also, surprisingly, it's not that new an instance to actually involve the players in the decision making. Arteta, Pep, they all get the players to involved in the why again, and understand and be involved in that decision making about what approach to take. It's not the didactic, dictatorial process of what you see from the managers shouting on the sideline and treating everybody as the same sort of homogenous group anymore. Just because of whether it's the backgrounds, the nationalities, you just can't afford to do that. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but
there's a question in the back, and then over here as well, please.
Hi, this is a question about the chatbot tool. When we're talking about, I just want to understand like the demographics of those that are being actually, this tool is being tested on.
So interestingly, we made a conscious decision not to collect demographic data, because from a GDPR point of view, the minute you collect demographic data, it's a whole, next level again. However, that said, you do get a sense of broad demographics within the kind of the client base and the type of organization that you're working for. And again, it's that whole thing about our kind of preconceptions are like, if it's a young audience that's used to texting or whatever, they're going to have a more of a affinity with the tool than not. And I've just not seen that playing out. It's really kind of across the board and quite broad. I think one of the key things is, because the type of tool that we're experimenting with actually asks you questions rather than answers your questions, 95, if not 99% of chatbots are designed to answer your questions. So one of the biggest barriers is actually getting people to disassociate with what they would expect a chatbot to do. But it's really about then getting people to experience what's it like to slow down and reflect. And I've just not seen really big demographic differences as we would perhaps expect, but I haven't got heaps and heaps of detailed data on it. That's my experience.
Hi, thank you. Fascinating work on both ends. I also have a question about the chatbot. My experience with business coaching has been that I found the most value in when I was confronted with discrepancies in my thinking and my behavior. And that is sometimes, I guess at this stage of technology, we need humans for that. And I'm just wondering whether any worries have ever come up, or whether you've had cases where potentially people ended up, you know, just like being in echo chambers with themselves, or, you know, people sometimes lie to themselves, not because they necessarily want to, but because they don't necessarily have a good sense of what's going on around them. So has that ever been a concern, or yeah, have you had cases around that?
Good point. Good.
I think it's an interesting thing, and you know, I'm still on the fence that actually, if you can have some level of human coaching within that, whether it's augmented or whatever, have it. You know, this is not about saying don't have the human coaching, because you can have a higher level of challenge within that. I think the other funny thing is, though, when you have that really high level of psychological safety, you have people much more willing to actually share and admit where those gaps are and where things could be different, perhaps more than we would necessarily think. And the other interesting thing, and Kinga and I had a chat with Bo after the session this morning, and one of the most interesting things, I think, is when you get people to the point where they can say, I don't know, or I'm not sure. And we have loaded up within our chatbot tool then different ways to get people to reflect deeper. But there is still a bit of a cultural challenge in some organisations and some conversations of getting people to admit, I don't know, or being comfortable with saying, I don't know. So certainly that's one of the things that I'm continuing to work on, to say, actually, how do we influence people to get to that point where they say, I don't know, so they can go deeper? And I think we kind of can improve that with tech. But yeah, you know, it's not yet at the stage where it can challenge to the level that a human can. But hey, let's have both.
But I think it's so interesting, because you said it's a culture in the organization. You can't say I don't know, but even when they know they're talking to a chatbot, it was a very small percentage of people who actually said it, even though nobody else was hearing it, which is fascinating.
And so that's where
Something
I think the
think
education
about.
piece comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I forgot the question, sorry. I think it was about ChatGPT, wasn't it, in terms of...
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
yes, it
yeah,
was. It was about ChatGPT. And I think one of the important things is, I think with all technologies or all types of learning or interventions, is that we can't have just one solution, right? We have to have, even if it's a course or a degree, you have to have other ways of learning and other ways of addressing it. So as you said, behavior, and maybe they're not recognizing their own behavior, so it's important to have other tools as well to have feedback from people in their group. So it's always an ecosystem of different approaches. Oh, there's a question right here, and then there, and then in the back.
Thank you. It's another ChatGPT question, I'm afraid, because I'm interested in implementing something like this myself. So I'm interested in what actually feeds the responses to the chatbot. Where does that come from? You know, the actual algorithms and the responses. Where does that come from? Is that from yourselves, or?
And so it depends. If you're talking about ChatGPT, that's kind of with your local language model, that's a slightly different answer to a chatbot coach. So in my mind, there's two different types of chatbots that we're talking about there. For the kind of the original version, that's what we're working on now and using, it's a very carefully and in-depthly scripted options. Like you wouldn't believe the different variations and pathways and conversations that are created within the tool to enable it to feel like a conversation. And yeah, different scenarios. For us, because we had over 20,000 human coaching conversations, so we're in 16 countries, 12 languages, we had a really big, broad base in which to draw from to then actually have that knowledge, the methodology, to then create that conversation. So that's kind of where we're at now. In terms of something like your ChatGPT, which works on much more of a statistical model, we're still going to be training it based on the conversations that we've had at the moment, to then be able to kind of feed that flexibility in, but within a framework. Because for me, it's not just about reflecting and answering the question, it's reflecting and answering the question with a view to getting action and impact for that organisation. So it's, yes, learner experience, coaching experience, but what's the impact and outcome that you're driving? So you've got to make sure that your questions and your algorithms drive towards that.
No, absolutely. But that must be a lot of work to take all of those conversations and put, any, eventual, potential answer, you question what their answer is.
Yeah.
You have to be ready with the right response. It must be a lot of work.
It's been a long 6 years, what can I say?
That's right.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks again for sharing some really interesting ideas. I guess shifting slightly more towards coaching and around opportunities and potential threats to the quality of coaching. So if you walk past a football pitch on a Sunday, you might hear you can't teach that, but you can learn it. And I guess you guys have been talking about holding space for people to work it out themselves. So do you think that around maybe misconceptions of what good coaching is could be perpetuated by technology because it's just telling, it's just about knowledge? And then the sort of second part of it was around the opportunities. So what really excites you about maybe changing coaching behaviours via technology?
Good question. I think to answer the first part particularly, I think, absolutely. Technology and the content and it could perpetuate. I think what we're trying to do is help people understand what they're doing and the impact it has on the players and the people around them. And I think we can't do anything in isolation within education. That's my division. It has to be with marketing and the grassroots and the wider business in terms of, there is a respect campaign within the FA about trying to address behaviour. So I don't think there's any one solution, and football is not there to solve societal ills, as we just like any other sport isn't. So sometimes we do. There has been since the pandemic an upturn again. We were doing reasonably well on behaviour. There has been an upturn in less, or more antisocial behaviour on the side of the pitches. Technology and what we do in education is only one aspect of solving that. What was the answer? What was the second question again? Sorry.
Thanks. The second question was around what, in terms of changing coaching practice and that kind of behaviour, what technology is making you excited about engaging in that space? I'm thinking particularly if you've got a very large volunteer workforce, do you feel like maybe you can use technology to reach and inspire people in a different way?
Yeah, I think what's really exciting me is the LXP functionality that we'll get with our new platform is in enabling people to self-direct and follow their own pathway rather than wait, as I mentioned, having to wait 6 months to go on a formal course. We'll chuck a load of content at you and hope some of it is relevant to you in your context. To, in the session earlier with David from the Learning Guild about personalisation, I'm not promising that we will get absolute personalisation, but if we can move our dial towards giving you solutions that meet your needs in your context a little bit closer to where you're at, that's for us it will be a game changer.
Wonderful, thank you. There was a question in the back and then you were in the front.
Hi, first of all, thank you both for the interesting conversations. My question's, I think, a little bit more on the chat coach side as well, but earlier you mentioned that you're looking to have the shortest, quickest, most efficient way to drive behavior change. Could you elaborate a little bit on maybe how you also measure that behavior change then after or through the coaching program? Because there's one way of actually doing the coaching and one way is actually being able to measure the impact from it.
Well, that's a big question. Measuring the impact of behavior. I mean, those are two massive conundrums people have.
Let's finish the coaching. Let's finish the conference on an absolute high.
That's right.
You know what? It can be done. I think we've made out that it's this real difficult thing as to how do we measure impact. So we've had core dashboards that we've been running for 15 years, and we can kind of really compare against that. You can certainly have an individual scoring uptake and benchmark that across different skills. You can also kind of label up your different skills underneath those scores, which is really interesting. The whole thing with the chatbot piece now gives us a whole new part of data which we wouldn't usually have within a coaching conversation, so that's been quite fascinating. I don't know if you know the work of Jack and Patty Phillips out of the US, the ROI Institute. They have just launched their 50th book with the ATD in the US, fortunate enough to have co-written that book with them. And it's all about how do you measure impact, particularly focusing on virtual learning. So it is a much kind of longer answer. You know, you can get people to relate it to their business KPIs when you're setting the action plan and then actually track those business KPIs. I think big data gives us the ability to do that in a much more practical way than we've ever done in the past. So I kind of think it's a watch this space, and let's actually just out it as it should no longer be difficult, and we have the ability to do it. So thanks for the question.
And final question to you in the front, please.
My question was a bit similar in regards to data, but I just wanted a simple story or a case where a learner was effectively supported by a chatbot, and what data were generated from this case, and how this data were then leveraged by the business. Just an example.
I think a lot of the time when you're talking about data, it's data that's aggregated at a cohort or a group level. So you'd have to, if you look at Brinkerhoff's work around case study methodology, you could get the individual story as to how that person has changed. But a lot of the time what you're doing is you're looking for that organizational change at a cohort level. So gosh, there's certainly, this is the challenge when you have, you know, thousands of individual conversations picking out a kind of single one within that. I'm trying to...
Because what I was thinking is that the same question is asked to all of the people from the cohort. So this is why I'm asking, like, if you can track if someone's performance has been improved, and if that led to reduction of defects on the job.
Yeah.
Like if that can happen actually by the user.
And so you'd actually ask someone, you know, what's the business benefit created through this experience? What's the changes you've made? What's the business benefits? And also one of my favorite questions is, what are you most proud of having achieved in the last couple of weeks? And so we have those huge data sets which you can then, you know, analyze from that information. I know that's not an individual story, and my mind is kind of going individual.
Fine. It helps me understand better how the chatbot works. And perfect. Thank you.
But I do like that question for people to think about what they're most proud of, because so often we don't think about it and we don't reflect on it, and that's just as important to think about than what you want to improve.
And if you're in a conversation with a chatbot, you are much more likely to really open up and truly answer that question than if it's on a form for an engagement survey.
Absolutely.
So it's fascinating.
That's fascinating. Well, so much to discuss about coaching and technology, and from such very different types of coaching. But as we close off, I mean, it's a big topic, but would you mind sharing one thought that we can all walk away with? And I see a lot of interest in people implementing and using coaching. What would you give as a final takeaway?
I think I just trying to link a few things, what people have said. I think for me, a good coach and understanding how to coach takes time and effort. It's a process. You know, going on one course on a leadership management program for an afternoon is not going to make you a coach, just as like it doesn't in football. So I think as L&D managers and leaders, a challenge is throughout to the room is, do you give your people in time and space and the right environment to learn, make mistakes, that psychological, and do they have the psychological safety and the trust with their people to get into the deepness and the richness of the conversation? Some of the best football, soccer coaching sessions have no involvement from the coach at all. The coach doesn't say anything because they've set up the environment, they've created the practice that elicits the outcomes they want. Now, I'm not suggesting that necessarily, but it's about the environment. For me, the environment you create to allow people to make mistakes and learn to be a good coach and ask the right questions at the right time.
I think that's so important, to setting up the environment that then supports everything else. It's important for all types of learning. Absolutely. Thank you. Emma?
I would just say experiment. You know, I have learned so much through just being open to experiment. I would say that's the one thing that I hope people will take away from today.
Right, try different things. Hopefully you all got some new ideas and things to think about and look into. So I would like to first of all thank both Emma and Nick. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible insights and knowledge on this topic. And I love the fact that you're coming to this from very different sides, and we see the commonalities and also the very vast aspects of coaching. And thank you so much for everyone for coming and for spending the last session of these wonderful 2 days and your wonderful questions. And there's contact information available if you'd like to get in touch with any of us. It's available here, I think. So there you go. So I think if you have any more questions, then I think you both welcome as well more questions. So thank you very much and enjoy the end of the conference. Thank you so much.